Okay, so it's a little after 6 o'clock, and I do want to get started. First, I want to welcome everyone to the second edition of our Girl Gang speaker series. Tonight's topic is on It's Okay to Not Be Okay, being mindful of your well-being during a crisis. We have a couple really great panelists here joining us tonight, and I'm super grateful that they took the time to join us. But before I get into introducing them, I do want to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Lauren Diaz. I'm one of the co-founders of Girl Gang. I'm also COO for Padres Pedal the Cause, a local nonprofit here in San Diego, and we raise money for cancer research. So one of my personal passions is making an impact and a difference in our community, and that's really what drove me to start Girl Gang. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Girl Gang started a little over a year ago. Myself and Eileen started it as a monthly women's only ride. We started as a group of 10 friends, and our community has grown to over 150 strong. And so with this growth, I realized the opportunity and the need for us to do more for this community, both on and off the bike. And so this is really where my vision for the evolution of Girl Gang came from, and just creating a stronger community through empowerment, education, and engagement. And so these speaker series are just the beginning of what we have in mind for Girl Gang. So with that, I do have one housekeeping item. So we really want this panel to be interactive. And so everyone can see on the screen, there is a chat button at the bottom of your screens. And here is where you can type in your questions. I have Jess Sarah joining me to help moderate these questions. She was featured on our first speaker series. And so if we don't get to your question tonight, we will be sending out both the responses and the recording after the fact. And so that is the one housekeeping item. And so with that, I do want to introduce our two amazing panelists. First, our subject matter expert for the evening is Bonnie Rumble. She is one of our local therapists here and also a cyclist. And then we have Lily Williams joining us. She is the 2020 world champion in the team pursuit. She's also a pro cyclist for rally cycling. But she's here to share her personal experience with her own depression. And we're really grateful that you're going to be open with us tonight. And I'm sure this is going to be a great educational topic for everyone. And so with that, Bonnie, I will turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself a little bit more to the audience.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lauren, so much for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I think it couldn't be more timely right now. What I'm seeing in my practice is a whole lot of grief, a whole lot of depression, and people really struggling with being isolated. So a little bit about myself. You asked me to talk about myself athletically and also professionally. So athletically, I started out as a distance runner, and I ran for years, and I love running. And I started having injuries after I ran Boston, and then I qualified to run Boston again, and then my body started falling apart at that point. So I decided it was time to diversify to keep myself intact. And I started doing triathlon and competing in triathlon. And then from there, doing a lot of biking. I did a lot of the challenged athlete rides. And then I joined a lot of the local cycling clubs where I met a lot of you wonderful people. And you've been a great part of my life and sometimes a lifesaver for me. So I really appreciate being a part of this community, and I've made some amazing friends. As far as professionally, I've been licensed for 27 years, and I have my Bachelor of Science in Recreation Therapy and my Master of Science in Counseling Education. And prior to getting my master's degree, I worked in hospitals as I was a department head for rehab services. I also did a lot of work at San Diego Center for Children and Rancho Park Hospital, where I trained them in running programs. I started running programs, and I also started workout programs for them, because for me, being athletic has been a huge part of my life. And so being able to share that with people was a love of mine. From there, I transitioned and recognized one of the things I loved most was the therapeutic aspect of working with patients. So I went back, I got my master's degree at that point, and I went on to get licensed and went into private practice, and I opened a practice. I have a practice in Cardiff, right by Seaside Market, And I also have a practice in Hillcrest. And I've trained 10 interns who have also gone on to get licensed themselves and go into private practice. As far as specialized training, I have specialized training in eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a technique used to desensitize emotions, because when we have a lot of emotions, we don't heal, we don't cognitively, we're not able to process things to a healthy place. So they started using it for Vietnam vets who were coming back from Vietnam with post-traumatic stress disorder. Since then, they found you can do it with all different types of traumas. I've used it with police officers who can't go back to work because they've been involved in shootings. I've used it with firefighters that can't get pictures out of their heads. I've used it with rape victims. I've used it with grief and loss, bad breakups, just about anything where people are having trouble moving past the emotion. I'm also trained in thought field therapy, which is a bioenergy procedure, which integrates clinical psychology and body energy. Some people refer to it as tapping. It's based on acupressure points and emotions and being able to move those through the body. And I do a lot of work in trauma resiliency too. Our nervous system has a resilient zone, and it's really easy to get kicked out of that resilient zone. And when that happens, chemicals start firing. So like a deer in headlights, the worst thing that can happen is they freeze, but they freeze because of the chemicals that are firing. So you use trauma resiliency to help people learn when the chemicals start firing and to get themselves back into a resilient zone using different type of therapeutic skills. I'm also a Red Cross volunteer. I've been doing that for about 15 years, and I do critical incident debriefing. So anytime there's an emergency situation, I can be called out to go to the situation and debrief the people that have been involved in whatever has happened. And I've pretty much done everything. I've worked in locked units, psych units, and I've also done women's growth groups. So that's kind of a little bit about me.
All right, Lily?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. You kind of touched on it already a little bit. My name is Lily. I am a professional cyclist for rally cycling on the road, and I also race with the U.S. national track team. And most recently, we competed right before all this stuff hit in Berlin at the World Championships, where we won the women's team pursuit, which was super exciting. I used to be teammates with Jess for 2 years on the road on Haggensberm and Supermint, which were the most incredibly fun times of my life so far on the bike. Before I was a cyclist, I, like Bonnie, was also a distance runner. I was a mid-distance runner in Florida growing up in high school, and then I went and ran Division I in college, where I struggled quite a bit and where I think a lot of my information for you tonight will start. And then after I graduated, I moved to Chicago for a master's program and started working in a bike shop, just doing school, not doing sport really, and then found the bike through my coworkers and fun local group rides, and fell in love with it pretty immediately, and things kind of just took off from there. That was in 2016. Now I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was living at the Olympic Training Center, training for Olympic selection. I would have been living there in the dorms through July, provided that I had been selected for the Olympic team. As you guys know, everything is all mixed up for everyone. So I've moved here permanently into my own space, which has been very good for my mental health. But that is just this week. So it's been very busy. Off the bike, I also work. I am the communications director for a 501c3 nonprofit called Bike Index. And I also do a bit of freelancing. My master's degree is in science journalism. So I definitely have an interest in how I can translate science for the layperson. I definitely have a specific interest in mental health and neurology and all that kind of stuff, given my own experience with depression and anxiety and seeing how it works in athletes. specifically. So yeah, that's kind of the 10,000 foot overview.
Well, thank you both, Bonnie and Lily, for joining us. We're going to start with Bonnie. She's a subject matter expert, so she's going to provide a little bit of educational information, and then we'll get right into the Q&A. So I'll turn it over to you, Bonnie.
Okay, so I thought what I'd do today is I'd talk about depression, grief, coping skills. Right now, with everything that's going on, I've been practicing, like I said, 27 years. And I think I have more people who are having suicidal thoughts than I have ever had in 27 years. So I'm seeing this really affect people in a pretty big way. People feeling really isolated, people's lives just kind of being turned upend. So just trying to help people kind of recognize where they're at, what's going on for them, and some ways to get through what you're dealing with. So right now, I think being sad is a really normal reaction to something that's really difficult. And sadness usually passes with the situation passing. Depression oftentimes doesn't. Depression is different. It's a mood disorder, and it can cause severe symptoms that affect your daily life. A lot of times it can be situational or chemical, or it can be both. What I see a lot is people who start to isolate, they turn inward, they don't reach out, they start to make up a lot of stories about themselves and who they are and what they have to offer. They start to believe they don't have anything to offer, and sometimes people are better off without them. They have a lot of trouble connecting. So recognizing if you have any of that going on, to reach out. It's really important. Also, a lot of trouble making decisions when you're depressed, ruminating about things. I call it spinning. It's like we can't shut our head off. We can't stop thinking about certain things and let go of them. We have trouble enjoying activities that we've usually enjoyed, trouble sleeping, eating, lack of focus, feeling really empty inside and hopeless. A lot of people think of depression as somebody that lays around on the couch and cries all the time and they don't function, and that's not what I tend to see. What I tend to see is people who are much more of what I would call having an agitated depression. So they're always in an overwhelmed state. They have lack of patience. Things that are this big feel like they're huge, even when they're not. They have a lot of trouble with patience. They have a lot of trouble with easily angered. And anger is a secondary emotion. A lot of times what's behind anger is sadness. So it's a way to protect ourselves. So if all of a sudden you notice you're much more angry than normal, sometimes there might be something going on behind that anger. So to pay attention to that, what's going on? Am I sad? Am I protecting myself? Depending on the level of depression, sometimes you can go into counseling, you can work through it, you can learn coping skills, you can learn to deal with the emotions that you're having. Sometimes you might need medication if it's really bad, especially if there's a chemical imbalance going on. Sometimes talk therapy isn't going to help you if you've got a chemical imbalance. No matter how much I talk to somebody, I can't reach in their brain and change what's going on chemically. When you've been depressed, it can be really scary and it can be really dark, because once you've experienced it at any time, you feel like it can come back. So there's a lot of fear I see with people who have had depression. They have a bad day, they have a sad day, they have a sad moment, and they assume, oh my gosh, I'm going to get depressed again, it's coming back. So I have this saying that I love that I teach my clients is, I don't live here, I'm just visiting. So like when I'm having a bad day, telling myself, I don't live here, I'm just visiting. In other words, you're not going to stay in this place. So trying to stay out of the fear of it and remind yourself, I don't live here, I'm just visiting. I actually had a client tattoo it on her forearm. So she came in with it tattooed down her forearm so she could read it all day long. I'm also seeing a lot of clients and friends who are dealing with grief right now. And I don't think people realize we're grieving. We're grieving the loss of everything we know. We're grieving the loss of our safety, fearing for ourselves, fearing for the people that we care about, fearing just so much has changed in the world, and is it going back to what it was? Also, a lot of social connection is missing. People are having a lot of fear around financial insecurity and just missing activities that we enjoy. And there's a lot of grief coming up for people, and I don't think they're recognizing that they're grieving. There's 5 stages of grief. They don't always come in order. There's denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. And how this has looked is, in the beginning, I was seeing a lot of denial. So people coming in, friends saying, oh, this isn't real, this isn't really happening. not believing it. So a lot of denial. Then came anger when we had to wear masks, when things were starting to shut down, when we couldn't do the things we normally wanted to do. Then came bargaining. Okay, if I stay inside for 2 weeks and I quarantine, it's all going to be over and we can go back to normal. Then when that didn't happen, then you start seeing a lot of sadness showing up for people, which I think is kind of what we're hitting now. A lot of people are sad. This has been going on for a long time. When are we going back to what we're used to? And then acceptance. And I think that's where we need to get to, kind of, okay, I need to like settle into this a little bit and accept what's going on and do the best I can and find ways to handle it and get through it. So sometimes you will experience all of those stages, sometimes not. So I saw this and I wanted to read it. I thought it was really good. May we never again take for granted family gatherings, birthday celebrations, the roar of a stadium, crowded concerts, mornings at the gym, coffee with a friend, happy hour, life itself. When I read that, it hit me. That's why we're all grieving, because so many of those things we're not able to do in the way we have done them in the past. So I know for myself, I think a lot of things that I probably did take for granted, I'm not anymore. I'm paying attention to that. So some ways to take care of yourself. And I know you have some of the PowerPoints with some of the stuff I'm going to be going over, so you can show those as I go. So one of the things I like to do for myself, and I tell my clients to do, is finding things to be grateful for and writing them down at the end of the day, like looking for 3 things that you can be grateful for in a day. Because what happens is, if you go through the day looking for things that you're grateful for or that make you feel good, that's what you're going to see. If you're looking for things that aren't okay, that's what you're going to see. We go towards what we're looking for. So if you have to write something down at the end of the day, it'll help you to be looking for it throughout the day, which will help you kind of stay focused on the positive. Also, recognizing that whatever our belief is, we prove it to be true. So we also go through the world looking for that. So if you believe people don't like you, every time you see proof of that, it's just going to make you feel more that way, as opposed to looking for the opposite. So trying to find the opposite of beliefs that don't work for you. And then the basics: eating healthy, exercising, indoor or out. One of the things I've been doing since my gym's closed is a lot of YouTube videos. And I'm finding that I'm really sore all the time because I'm doing all these exercises I've never done. And it's actually been kind of fun. I've learned a lot of new things, and I feel like I'm doing all kinds of new exercises that are helpful. So getting outside, fresh air, we all do that. Stretching, setting and maintaining a routine. I think a lot of us are really thrown off right now, and without our normal routines, it's hard to ground ourselves. So I think it's really important to get in the mindset of, okay, what am I doing today? What's my routine? And trying to maintain some sort of semblance of order in your life. Focusing on the things you can control, that's you. Sometimes your children, if you're lucky, usually just you. Usually using technology to stay connected. That I think using FaceTime and Skype, and for me, I'm using DoxyMe, which is a telehealth HIPAA compliant program. I think seeing people face to face as opposed to just talking on the phone makes a huge difference, because you can see their facial expressions, you can connect with them more. It makes us feel more like we're with people. So whenever you can, try to pull somebody up on a screen rather than just hearing their voice. Avoiding the news. I'm watching a lot of people with way too much news going on, and news is really negative. It's one thing to be informed, it's another to inundate yourself with it. Looking for ways to help in the community. I know for myself, if I'm having a bad day and I go into work, I don't think about my bad day anymore. I'm thinking about who I'm helping. So go get groceries for a neighbor, reach out, volunteer, do some things to take your eyes off of yourself. Take time to be quiet. There's a lot of mindfulness apps and meditation apps. And I know Lauren just posted them up on the screen. There's also a program called Coursera.com, which is free educational classes, programs. One of the ones that's wonderful, it came out of Yale. A lot of people have heard of it. It was on happiness. They're offering that for free right now. So just a lot of classes that you can take advantage of. Also utilizing grounding techniques. I'm going to teach you one right now that's really helpful. So anxiety and everything comes from our head. So we have to learn to get out of our head and into our body to shut down anxiety, the spinning thoughts, being in a bad place. So if you put your feet on the ground and you feel your feet touching the ground right now, kind of something solid below you, the earth, something strong. You can't be in your head and your feet at the same time. Also, you can feel your legs touching the chair. You can feel your back against the chair, just like coming into your body and getting out of your head. It's something I do regularly. So the minute my feet touch the ground, I can literally feel myself just like the air coming out of the balloon. So practicing that. So just feeling your feet touching the ground and getting out of your head and into your body. Another thing is not to worry twice. I can't tell you how many weeks I spend with people that come into my office and they worry about things week after week after week that don't come true. So I tell them, don't worry twice. If it's happening right now, you get to worry about it. If it's not happening right now, wait till it is and then worry yourself as much as you want. And then stopping the making up stories. We tend to make up a lot of stories. And what I also see is what we make up is usually worst case scenario and usually not what's true. So I tell people, ask yourself when you're making up stories and you're going places in your head, is this true? Yes or no? Am I sure this is true? So I'm also seeing some good things come out of this. I'm seeing this as a reset for myself, for the world. I'm seeing it giving the environment a break. I'm watching families spend a lot more time together, playing games, eating. I'm also seeing people be active who have never been active before. My street looks like people are running, people are walking that I've never even seen out before. The other day I was riding up Torrey and I was halfway up and I said hello to this woman and she was probably about 50 pounds overweight and she told me it was her first time up Torrey. And so I stood up at the top and I cheered for her when she came up and I thought, that's amazing. And hopefully all these people that are getting out and being physical and moving because they can't stand being in their house will continue to do that. Also, slowing down is happening. I know for myself, I've slowed down, and I think just as a community, I think we've slowed down, and I don't think that's such a bad thing. I think we tend to go in a really frenetic pace, and that's not always good for us. So hopefully you're finding some time to slow down, and you can turn inward a bit during this time and find some peace through all of this. And then I had one other thing I wanted to leave you with that I was going to read that somebody sent me that I thought was wonderful. When you go out and you see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, it looks like the end of the world. What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our grandparents, for our immune-compromised brothers and sisters, for people we will never meet. People will lose jobs over this, some will lose their businesses, and some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk, on your way to the store, or just watching the news to look into the emptiness and marvel at all of the love. Let it fill and sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It is the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. That was super helpful and super insightful. So Lily, I'll turn it over to you. And I know you have a lot to say on this topic and you can build on kind of what Bonnie founded us on.
Yeah, 100%. So much of what Bonnie has said is stuff that I have encountered with therapists and psychiatrists that I've spoken to over the past 7 years or so. Techniques that have really, really worked for me that you just don't know about. So I think so much of this information will play off what I have to say as well. So thanks so much, Bonnie. Yeah, in retrospect, if I look back at my life, I've probably been depressed for all of it. But I don't think I really experienced or had talked to other people with depression until I got to college. I just didn't really, I just assumed that this is what life was like for me, and I had adapted very well and was very functional and didn't see myself as unhappy or anything like that. But there were certainly some underlying issues that started to really manifest when I got to school and started experiencing some of the first real life stress in terms of things that obligations and failures and things that I just didn't have to deal with before being a bit more independent. As I mentioned earlier, I was a runner in college. I was very good in high school and got a scholarship to run, like I mentioned. And then when I got to college, everything just got harder. I went into college injured, so I missed my first probably 6 or 7 months of running my first cross country season. I did cross country and track. And I was super type A, super intense in high school, always ran as hard as I could, always got straight A grades, you know, was really careful about diet, all that stuff. And then I got to college and I was injured. And I was doing this like self-written cross training regimen that had no basis in like any sort of scientific training program. And I just totally burned myself out. By the time I got back to running, I came in super fit, but I was starting to kind of, there were definitely some cracks. I was starting to see the benefit of making friends, which I had never really allowed myself to do. School was much harder, so I was not doing as well in school as I was used to be doing. And everything just sort of kind of came crashing down. I realized that I no longer loved running. I felt like I was always a bit too heavy to really run like some of my teammates as well. So my sophomore year, I had a relatively serious eating disorder. And by the end of my sophomore year, I had one teammate reach out and say, hey, I think you need to get some help. Because I was, you know, staying out all night partying, and I was running terribly, and I was lashing out at my teammates, and things were not good. So the summer after my sophomore year, I started going to see a therapist, a psychologist at our psychological counseling center. And my main concern at that point was really to curb the eating disorder that I had. I was bulimic, and I was just constantly preoccupied with food, binging and purging multiple times a day. It was just taking up my literal time, and it was not sustainable. I got pneumonia. All of this was just tied into how I felt on the inside. I was very confused and lost. But luckily, the resources on campus were incredible. I instantly got connected with a therapist and psychiatrist, started taking both an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medication, which took about a year to really find the right dose, but I think really helped me stop some of those compulsive behaviors. I'm pretty obsessive compulsive in a lot of things. So I just would get in these ruts kind of thinking, like Bonnie was talking about, those ruts of worrying or thinking I'm not good enough. And those medications really helped me kind of break that cycle and stop the buzzing. Everything was always buzzing in my head. And so I finished my college running career. I finished it out, got my degree. And then when I graduated, I was in a pretty stable place. I had gotten into a graduate program and stopped running after our last meet and was just excited to do something different. Moved to Chicago, drove across the country with my car packed full of stuff, the cat, my commuter bike on the back, a cactus, you know, classic post-college move. And then started this new life, and was loving my program, was loving not being an athlete. I was working out just for fun. I started working at a shop and had these new amazing coworkers. And then I started feeling depressed again, and I couldn't really figure out why. And I started having the fear that this was just going to be my life, and no matter how good things got, that is how life was going to be. The services on my new campus were unfortunately not nearly as good. I was tasked with finding my own provider in network, which obviously I had no idea how to do. Prior to that, I had just gone through the school. And so I didn't do anything. I had stayed off my medication, or I had stopped taking medication because I didn't feel like I needed it anymore. And things gradually got better. I moved away from Chicago after just a year, after I finished my program. And I think that leads into where I am now, which is just that things totally ebb and flow. There are definitely good days, definitely less good days. I feel like in general, I have a great handle on things through tools like meditation. I use the Headspace app. I've done it every day for over 2 years, even if it's just 3 minutes. It employs some of those techniques like the body scan, just trying to take yourself out of that repetitious cycle of stressing and that stress feeding itself, and just being present in the moment. That has been huge for me. One of the things that I have always struggled with when conceptualizing my own depression was circumstantial versus what I perceived as inherent depression. In retrospect, like I think I definitely have the mood disorder that Bonnie was describing, but it comes and goes. So in college, when I was having a really hard time, like that was obviously a circumstance that really affected how I felt. And right now with COVID, it's another circumstance that has really been affecting, I know, so many people. I feel more stressed in so many ways right now than normal. A lot of it is because I'm busy. I'm just so busy somehow, and I feel thankful to be busy. But there's a ton going on with work and with training. I'm doing my first space training season ever because normally I race year round. So I've been very fatigued from that, and that has really affected my mood. And for a while, I thought that if it was just circumstantial, it wasn't really depression, and it didn't really matter. But I think that is not the case now after having been in this position for a long time. I think every person is different when it comes to depression, and I think that any way you feel is valid. So that leads me into what I wanted to talk about a little bit next, is just that the path to kind of figuring out there was an issue to where I am now, which I would say is a pretty stable spot, has definitely not been linear. It goes up and down, like I mentioned, based on circumstance and based on, I mean, even just like getting my period drastically affects my mood. And it can seem like the end of the world. And that's definitely something that I find is important to note and pay attention to and acknowledge those feelings. And then wake up the next day and acknowledge how you feel the next day. I don't think things are going to be perfect one day, and that is totally okay. For me, techniques that have really helped, like I mentioned, meditation. I've talked to somebody in some capacity ever since my sophomore year of college, and it has been incredible for me just to work through what I'm feeling. They help with techniques to understand why you're feeling. I'm very into like the science behind things and why I feel the way I do, and finding real implementable techniques that help me. Everyone's different, of course, and what works for them, but some of those things have been great. And then I would have never gone to see somebody if I didn't have one teammate who just said, hey, we care about you. We want you to be better. And just having one person, one confidant that you can talk to about this kind of stuff, or multiple, you know, I think at this point, a lot of people can relate right now. And being able to just say how you feel is so important. I think in college, even my first few years of college in 2012, 2013, people aren't really talking about depression. Whereas now it is it's not easy to talk about, but it's so much more accepted. So being able to relate to people and kind of get that off your chest has been really amazing for me. Let's see, what else?
So Lily, I actually, I think I have a really good question that's kind of
okay. That's kind of it for me anyway. So
a perfect kind of segue here. And so
great.
I think lots of things you touched on, and you mentioned that a teammate was the one that really approached you and said, hey, I think you should talk to someone. So Bonnie, the question here is, so in this kind of new norm where we're not really around people as much as we were, what are ways to identify kind of our well-being and assess, like, do we need help, and how do we really assess and understand where we are personally, and if things have changed kind of given this new circumstance?
Well, I think some of the symptoms I talked about, if we're turning inward, if we're not reaching out, if we're starting to isolate, if we're making up stories like people really don't want to talk to us, like we're feeling like we're not worth it. Because what happens when we start to get depressed is we distort everything. We're looking through a distorted lens at the world, at our friends, at ourselves. So having trouble eating, having trouble sleeping, all of a sudden you're much more angry. So any of those types of things can, or agitated, no patience, you can't cope with things you normally cope with. Sometimes it can be really extreme. I had a client say to me one time, just getting out of bed and him picking out the tie he was going to wear for the day for work could send him back to bed. So in other words, things that are this big start to feel this big, which is a big sign with depression. You can't handle things. You're just trying to get through the day. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think really the takeaway is, I think from my perspective, is to be like proactive. So if you're listening to this thinking maybe that is me, then just rather be safe and reach out to, even if it's just a friend, but as Lily mentioned, just reach out to someone and let them know where you're at.
Yeah, and I think if you have somebody that you really trust, asking them how they think you're doing. You know, sometimes somebody else has a better picture of you than you do. So if there's somebody you feel really safe with and you're concerned about yourself, just checking in. Am I showing up the same way? How do I seem?
And that kind of leads into the next question. And I think, Bonnie, I'll have you answer. And then Lily, I'd also love your kind of insight on this as well. But the question is, so what type of examples of support can you look for from others besides just you expressing kind of how you're feeling? What are things we can do to ask others that could help us?
Well, I think finding time, having people spend time with us, asking people to spend time with us, asking people if you can check in with them on a little more of a regular basis. I think being vulnerable with people and letting them know you're struggling and what you're needing. And yes, we can ask so much of somebody, and I think sometimes it can be too much. So if you feel like you're needing constant support from people, that's probably the time that you need to get some professional help. So, and hopefully if anybody is doing that to you and reaching out all the time and you're really seeing them struggling, you might want to suggest that they get professional help depending on what's going on for them.
Lily, anything?
Yeah. Well, for me, I tend not to ask for help until things get a little too extreme. I've been pretty overwhelmed with the amount of communication I've been experiencing right now, to be honest, just because more people have time, and I feel like, especially with the move across the country, I have had significantly less time. So I'll kind of like bottle it up until I get one too many texts, and then I kind of lash out at the people who are just trying to check in on me. So for me, it's asking for support. It looks a little different. It's just more like casual conversation every now and then, people just talking about something totally irrelevant, like cats, or just talking to my sister. So I think it really, it just depends on you. I think, like Bonnie said, it probably, if you need to talk to someone all the time or need constant support, that looks a little different for you than it would for me personally.
Thank you. And so a really good question here, and this is something that I face, but the question is, how do you balance caring for others while caring for yourself?
I'll go after.
Okay. So, caring for others while caring for yourself. Well, you can't care for others if you don't take care of yourself. And I've found that when I start feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go to work. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing way too many people today. That's usually a big sign for me that I'm not doing what I need to be doing for myself, because I love what I do. But when I start getting depleted, I don't want to go do what I do. So for me, that's a huge red flag. And for me, it's usually having time with family. It's making sure I get my exercise and I'm doing what I need to do to keep myself healthy. Being active is a huge release for me. And also connecting with my support system, I think is really important. Or if I have something I'm really struggling with for me at work that's hard to cope with, I have really good friends who are also therapists, so I can reach out to them and get support through whatever it is that's going on that feels, way too heavy.
Yeah, very similar. I've really had to learn over the past 5 years or so to say no and to prioritize certain things. Otherwise, I'm tempted to say yes to every person that wants to chat or wants to do something, and then I get incredibly overwhelmed. I personally need a lot of alone time, multiple hours a day where I'm not focusing on work or on training, where I'm just sitting, listening to music, something like that. And if I don't get that, then I can't do anything for anybody else. So I have to take deliberate steps to make sure I do that. Otherwise, like I was kind of talking about before, I tend to bottle things up and lash out at people, which is not, which is obviously helpful for nobody. So it definitely takes deliberate action to make sure you are doing what you specifically need to do. Maybe that is talking to people totally different than me. But figuring that out takes a long time too. So, yeah.
Yeah, Lily, I mean, I commend you. You seem very self-aware in terms of like what you need in terms of self-care.
Yeah.
I think this is also a good time where we can all take some time and understand what we need for ourselves to make us happy on a daily basis. And like, I'm similar to probably many, but sunshine and exercise and healthy eating, I mean, those simple things like really keep me happy day to day. So I think that's really something we should just kind of encourage everyone who hasn't taken the time to do that. I have a really good question here. So what advice do you have for those who don't have more time now? So for some people on this call, work has actually become more busy and more stressful, right? And so the question is, I found it difficult to make time and space for myself. And so I think the question is just really, what do you suggest to those people that are, in a busier, more stressful time right now?
Yeah, if people have an answer, let me know, because I am also really struggling with this. I am very overwhelmed. I'm not actually sure. What's been helpful for me so far has just been when I talk to my sports psychologist, she had me write down what I want to say when I feel overwhelmed and like the nice version of saying it. So what I want to say is like, please fuck off. I am so overwhelmed. I wish you could see how overwhelmed I am. And she says, hey, I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I can't respond to you right now, even though I really want to because I care about you. I just need a few days to figure this out for myself. And then another technique that she has told me is to stop looking at things as so black and white. So like, this isn't the worst, busiest day ever versus the best day ever. It's just kind of, it's a day and it's happening. And maybe don't think of it as being overwhelmed or underwhelmed, but being just whelmed. These are things that I have just loved and that have been so helpful for me personally. So yeah, just taking a minute when I feel anger or stress to just like wait for it to pass. Bonnie would say, it's just visiting, you're just visiting. So it hasn't been perfect, that's for sure. I have not implemented this perfectly, but I've been trying.
And I would think, yeah, that saying, I don't live here, I'm just visiting, reminding yourself you're not staying here. I think stopping throughout the day, even if it's 5 minutes to ground yourself or do a meditation or do something to kind of just breathe a little bit, getting outside and taking a walk around your house if you're working from home, just something to break it up. I also think having boundaries is important.
Yeah.
We're working for somebody, it doesn't mean we don't get to have boundaries. Sometimes we have to say, I've had clients having to set limits and saying, no, this is too much, I can't do all of this. So I think giving yourself permission to have boundaries when you need them is also important. A lot of people are homeschooling their, elementary school children and trying to work. So something's got to give somewhere. And I think it's okay to say, it's too much.
Yeah.
So this question, I'm just going to switch topics here. I think this is really important that we address it, but the question is, what should I do if I feel like my friends don't want to help me and that they're not there for me right now during this time, and I feel like they're pushing me away?
Well, first thing I would do is I would really check in with yourself if you're feeling that way, because one of the things we tend to feel when we are depressed is that we don't have anything to offer. People don't want to be around us. It's almost like we project onto other people how we're feeling. And also, if you're feeling that, check in with some of your friends. Ask them what's going on. I feel like you're pulling away. Is there something I've done? Like find out the reality of what's going on. And then maybe you might also need somebody to help you, a counselor, a therapist, somebody that you can talk to about what you're experiencing, especially if that's not a normal thing that goes on in your life.
I think I have another really good question here, but the question is, a lot of us are facing pretty big, challenging life decisions right now, even though this feels like a terrible time to be making these types of decisions, given, the circumstances and our potential emotional state. Do you have any suggestions for navigating these decisions right now?
I guess it would depend on what the decision was, because I usually tell people you don't make decisions when you're in a really emotional place, because that's not usually when we make our best decisions. And we also shouldn't be making decisions out of fear. So trying to find ways to ground yourself, maybe talking it through with somebody else, so it's not just coming from you with your emotions. A lot of times when we're too close to it, we don't see it clearly. I know for myself, I can have things going on in my own life that I could help you with, but when it's happening to me, I don't know what to do about it. So sometimes having somebody else help you with the decision, they might see it more clearly than you do, because emotions aren't rational. And when you're emotional about something, you don't see it as clearly as you need to.
Okay, so the next question is for Lily, and then Bonnie, I'd also like kind of your opinion on it. But the question is, I'm going to slightly rephrase it, but is the person's wondering whether athletes, amateur or pro, find it harder to seek help from others because they feel like they're exposing or conveying the message that they're weak. And I think this really applies to anyone that is has a strong ego. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and how you became open with expressing, and it's not a weakness, right? It's just a part of who we are. So Lily, if you want to talk a little bit on that.
Yeah, I kind of said it before, but I would have probably never talked about this with anyone unless somebody had helped me talk about it and go to see somebody. And as soon as I knew that that was an option, I was like, yes, I'm doing this, thank God. And I think more often than not, people will be there to support you. At least that is what I found, especially in the cycling community. I don't know if the questioner is a cyclist or not, but I think that taking those moments to be vulnerable with a few trusted people will not be considered weakness at all. I think you demonstrating the steps to improve your life is really something that people respect and admire. And if you demonstrate that you have done it, then you may encourage other people to do that as well. Yeah, with athletes, I think things are improving. There's a general very strange perception of athletes to me in pop culture and what have you. But I think just like regular perceptions of depression in the non-athlete world, it's becoming so much more accepted to talk about and just a normal part of life, especially in this weird age that we live in without COVID even. So I think you'll be surprised if you are a bit more open about this, how much support you'll receive.
And I think the one thing I want to highlight here that I don't think has been explicitly mentioned is that this is also a time, to Lily's point, is if someone hadn't reached out to her and said, hey, maybe you should seek help, that was really the driver in her getting help. So if you're struggling, obviously talk to someone, but if you see someone struggling, maybe just say something to them and say, hey, you should speak to someone. You never know, that could change their lives. And so I think that's just something else I wanted to convey in this message.
Yeah, I also think a lot of athletes are self-medicating, that the level of activity they're doing creates good feeling chemicals in our brain. And what I see a lot of times is people get injured or things happen, myself included, it's like you feel the serotonin leaving your brain. You can literally almost feel yourself starting to crash. You know, so I think a lot of athletes, what I see, it's like they're just going to exercise more, they're just going to eat healthier, like they can fix this, where sometimes they can't, you know, so recognizing that you shouldn't have to be exercising more and more and more to feel good.
This is also a great question. We have so many good questions. Thank you everyone for submitting them. But the question is, if you live with someone, whether it's a roommate or a family member, your husband, whatever it is, who doesn't believe that mental health issues are real, can you advise on some ways to communicate with them?
Well, you're not going to convince anybody of anything. So I think it's more about how you handle it yourself, because I don't know that if somebody doesn't believe something, they're going to have to find out on their own. You can give them information to read. Sometimes if you're too close to them, they're not going to hear you. Sometimes having somebody else tell them, but sometimes it's more about managing it within yourself if you can't get support from somebody that you're close to or that you live with.
Yeah, I agree. Jess and I had a teammate who outright said that she thought mental illness was weakness. But at the same time, this person was so compassionate. Like that was just the way that she framed this particular issue in her mind. I feel like, yeah, maybe trying to convince someone would be like having an argument on Facebook. Like it just won't, it won't go anywhere, and it'll just make you feel worse. But yeah, having that person as a roommate or partner might be pretty difficult.
I have a really good question here. So, do you have any suggestions for anyone kind of that feels like they're missing out on so many opportunities right now, whether it's college students missing their graduation or people that have trained? I mean, obviously Lily, the Olympics, right? And so, I mean, I think we all had some sort of goal on the calendar, whether athletic or professional. Maybe we're about to get a promotion at work and now, like, you know, that's not going to happen, or there's layoffs. And so everything in our 3-month plan has been totally turned upside down. And so what are the recommendations for people feeling like they're missing out, or that now everything that they've planned for and trained for is kind of gone?
One of the things I've learned in doing what I do, I deal with really heavy, awful things on a daily basis. You know, people come in that have had horrible things happen in their lives, especially when I'm working with trauma. And I don't know that I could do this sometimes if I didn't see what happens as we go through the process. I would say 95% of the time I see really good things come from even really awful, horrible things. And I hang on to that when I'm going through it. So I think sometimes trusting that, yeah, it's not good right now, but there's something possibly coming that's going to be better or different, and holding on to that a little bit. I know it's what I do that gets me through when I'm working with somebody that there's something really awful that's gone on in their life, because I've done it long enough and I've worked through things long enough with people to see we get to the other side of things. And it's hard when you're in it to see, you know, the forest through the trees, but trying to hold on to that.
Yeah, just the one brief addition. I think many of us are very goal oriented, and then you take away those goals and we feel kind of lost. But I feel like this is the first time that I've had ever to just ride my bike, which is something that I just love and cherish. And I think initially the shock and the anger was there, but that's kind of subsided, and I've tried to just find other things about this time to hold me over until we kind of return to normal, and that has been really helpful.
I think too, my running injuries, at the time when they started happening, they were devastating, but I met all of you in the cycling community, and that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have running injuries. I would have never gotten on my bike and ridden hundreds of miles. So something good came out of it.
Thank you. So we're running short on time. So I instead of taking one more question, what I'd like to do is I know, Bonnie, you mentioned it, Lily. I'd like to close kind of with you providing the audience kind of, you know, whatever it is, a reminder of what they can be doing for self-care. So like the 3 gratitudes, I know that's something I do every day. I actually wake up every morning, say 3 things I'm grateful for, and before I go to bed, I say 3 things I'm grateful for, and it's really incredible. So I think, again, like leaving everyone with a final takeaway of what we can be doing on a daily basis to be mindful of our well-being.
So I think I think that's a great thing. And I think it's really important to write it down at the end of the day, because then you're looking for it throughout the day, and you're trying to find things that are positive, because it's easy to find things that aren't. I think also making sure you're eating well, you're getting enough sleep, you're getting enough social contact, you're reaching out to people, finding time to be quiet and turn inward, and also maybe being thankful for some of what's going on, you know, because I think there are some good things that are coming from this, and trying to find those for yourself. You know, what's going on that maybe has been positive around this. It's not all been negative. Looking for those pieces, I think, is important. And just being aware if there are any symptoms that are shifting and you're not feeling good within yourself, reaching out to people, asking for help.
Yeah, gratitude has changed my life, even more than just this scenario. I think as I get older, it's easier and easier to be thankful for things, but also taking deliberate actions to be thankful has really been helpful for me. And then, yeah, just taking a minute, or at least for me personally, taking a minute or 2 each day to, like, if I'm not riding outside or whatnot, just get outside, get in the sun, get some vitamin D, and just sit and think. Just like allow my thoughts to happen for a few minutes. I know some people might be super bored and feel like they're doing that all day, but other people, like I have not had time to do that. So making sure I do that has been pretty game changing.
And
Also, finding ways to laugh is important too.
Yeah.
Doing things that make you laugh.
And Jess, I know I stole the entire show as fielding all the questions, but I would love to hear, and I'm sure everyone would love to kind of hear what you've been doing on a daily basis to kind of keep your positive mindset. You've been doing a ton for our community. So any closing words for the audience here, Jess?
Yeah, so I've also struggled with depression and anxiety in the past, and I've even done the treatment that Bonnie spoke of in the beginning for post-traumatic stress, and that's too much to discuss right now. But one of the takeaways that I've learned from getting out of that cycle is to focus on other things outside of yourself. And to be frank, I'm struggling right now. My small business is struggling because of COVID closures. All of my employment revolves around events, and I have taught myself over the years that in these times, finding something outside of your own brain that you're passionate about is a really good way to take the pressure off of yourself. Because ultimately, it's that loop that Lily and Bonnie have discussed of that pressure and that chatter all the time. And if you kind of commit it to something else, not only do you start to feel better about yourself because you're helping someone or you're helping your community, but you automatically start making connections with people. Like, I've been overwhelmed with the connections I've made and the support and the people who've showed up. And I actually made an Instagram post about that this afternoon. So I understand that some people are busier or managing having children who are missing out on things, and it may not be 100% applicable. But anything that you can do to sort of take that focus to something that makes you feel good, because, you know, sometimes when you're not feeling good and you think about others and you do something nice for them, all of a sudden you're, you know, feeling a little better yourself. This is pretty much my advice right now.
All right, guys, we're right at 7. So thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Lily. Thanks for everyone that tuned in. We will be sending out the recording in the next couple of days. And we look forward to seeing you guys for series number 3. Have a good night, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.